The hotel ballroom had been prepared for a celebration, not a correction. Soft gold light reflected from the glass walls. The opening night logo filled the main presentation screen, and rows of investors, department leaders, vendors, and senior staff waited for the final project announcement. When the revised hotel plan appeared, the heroine saw that her name was gone. A department leader near the front looked from the screen to her and asked why the woman who had designed the hotel's guest flow system was no longer listed. No one answered him directly. The heroine had spent months building a hotel operation where guests would receive consistent service. Employees would have stable systems, and each department would understand how its decisions affected the next. Now the document described her contribution so vaguely that she appeared to have been only an early participant. The billionaire father's wife stood beside the screen, composed and confident, explaining that the revision created a cleaner public image and a more unified chain of representation. She spoke about confidence, legacy, and moving forward. She never said that removing the heroine's name had also removed the person who understood how the hotel's departments were meant to work together. Staff members watched the heroine, expecting anger. She did not demand the microphone. She did not accuse anyone of stealing her work. She stepped closer to the screen and examined the changes line by line. Her missing name was only the first problem. The revised plan had shortened the coordination instructions connecting guest arrival, room readiness confirmation, front desk staffing, and service recovery. One safeguard requiring departments to confirm a handoff before transferring responsibility had disappeared completely. Another procedure that required service interruptions to be reported before they reached the guest had been reduced to a vague instruction about department discretion. The document looked simpler because the connections beneath it had been stripped away. The father's wife introduced the people who would represent the hotel publicly and said the new structure would eliminate confusion before opening night. The heroine recognized the contradiction immediately. The plan promised clarity while removing the procedures that created it. A senior project member asked whether the changes had been tested through the same preparation process as the earlier version. The room became quiet. The father's wife replied that everything had been handled through the proper family and project channels. She did not say the revised system had passed a full readiness test. The billionaire father stood nearby, visibly uncomfortable but silent. He had allowed his wife to manage the public presentation because he believed one family voice would keep the project calm. His silence gave her decisions authority without requiring anyone to explain their professional basis. The heroine looked at him once, then returned her attention to the plan. Asking her father to defend her would turn the moment into a private family dispute. She needed the issue to remain measurable. Before the presentation ended, she requested the prior version, the revision history, and the updated opening schedule. She asked that the request be entered into the project record. Her action was quiet, but it changed the nature of the conflict. She was no longer only the woman whose name had been removed. She was the person asking what had changed, who had approved it, and whether those changes worked. As she compared the plans, she identified 3 missing protections: one for high-volume arrivals, one for communication between housekeeping and front desk, and one for reporting service interruptions before guests experience them. She wrote down the differences instead of confronting the wife in front of the room. The meeting continued without restoring her role, but the polished presentation had created a question no one could dismiss. If removing her name had also removed the hotel's safeguards, what would happen when real guests arrived? During the next readiness exercise, the heroine focused on the hotel rather than the public insult. Without formal authority, she could not direct the teams, but she could observe how the revised process behaved under pressure. The first test involved a simulated group arrival. Front desk staff expected room status updates through the shortened route created after her removal. Housekeeping expected the same information to move through a different channel. The inconsistency remained hidden until the first simulated guests reached the lobby. Several employees compensated through extra phone calls and personal judgment, but the handoff took longer than the hotel's opening standard allowed. The heroine recorded the timing and compared it with the earlier framework. She did not interrupt the drill or announce that she had predicted the problem. Her goal was not to make the hotel fail, so she could reclaim her place. It was to protect service quality, staff stability, and the guest experience before the public opening. The father's wife dismissed the delay as an ordinary rehearsal problem and suggested that the heroine was focusing on imperfections because she resented the revised leadership structure. The escalation came before the staff had completed the second exercise. The heroine answered by asking that the same process be tested again at a higher volume. A professional concern needed repeatable evidence, not an emotional argument. During a staff transition meeting later that day, she identified another weakness. Two departments were using different definitions for the same priority category. A request marked urgent by one team could arrive as routine to another. She asked the managers to compare their instructions, and the inconsistency became visible without her taking command. Her strength was not simply knowing hotel operations. She understood how small differences in timing, language, and responsibility could combine into a larger guest-facing failure. A service recovery drill revealed the third problem. The revised structure encouraged each department to resolve issues separately, but the heroine knew that one guest problem often crossed several teams. Her earlier framework had required staff to share the issue before the guest was forced to repeat the same explanation. That connection had been removed. She preserved the result along with the plan versions and exercise records. At the same time, she confronted a weakness in her own work. Parts of the original system depended too heavily on experienced people who understood her expectations without every decision being written down. The hotel had needed less dependence on one person, but erasing the safeguards was not the same as distributing authority correctly. The heroine began documenting how the strongest procedures could function without requiring her personal approval. During the second high-volume arrival exercise, the same handoff delay appeared again and lasted longer. Staff eventually solved it manually, but the repeated result established a measurable mini-payoff. One warning connected to the removed safeguards had been correct. The finding did not prove that the entire revised structure would fail. It proved that a professional risk had been dismissed without sufficient testing. The father's wife continued framing the concern as a personal reaction to lost recognition. The heroine did not answer the accusation directly. She saved the timing results, preserved the differences between the two plans, and created a private evidence record containing only existing project materials. She marked the dates of each change, the departments affected, and the consequence observed during testing. She also included the weaknesses in her own earlier design. The evidence would be stronger if it could survive honest examination. Before leaving the hotel that evening, she reviewed the opening timeline and recognized how little time remained. The next action would expose the revised plan, but it could also expose her own professional failures. The central question had changed. It was no longer whether she deserved to see her name on the screen. It was whether she was willing to submit her own work to the same scrutiny she demanded of everyone else. The next morning, the heroine submitted an operational integrity notice requesting preservation of the existing project records and an independent examination of the changes made before opening night. Once filed, the notice could not be withdrawn quietly. It would test the revised procedures, the missing safeguards, the readiness results, and the system she had designed. It could prove that the father's wife had weakened the hotel's preparation, but it could also confirm that the heroine's earlier approach had depended too heavily on her own judgment. By filing it, she surrendered the option of resolving the conflict through a private apology or a symbolic return of her name. The father's wife reacted immediately. She told project representatives that the notice was an emotional escalation timed to embarrass the hotel before its opening. Through her family office communication role, she attempted to limit which explanations reached investors and vendors. Her message was simple. The hotel was stable, and the heroine was creating uncertainty because she had lost public recognition. The heroine refused to argue about motive. She stated that the process should examine records, preparation results, and decision outcomes. If the revised structure worked, the findings would show it. If her own work contained weaknesses, those findings should remain in the record as well. The evaluators began with the existing version history, preparation materials, revised plan, staff schedules, and exercise results. They found that several coordination protections had been removed without a full high-volume test. The hotel had gained a cleaner presentation but lost some of the links that allowed departments to respond together. During an observed readiness check, the arrival delay appeared again. Staff members corrected the problem only after adding communication steps manually. The earlier framework had been designed to trigger those steps before the lobby slowed. The findings supported the heroine's warning, but it did not clear her of responsibility. The examination also confirmed that her original design placed too much knowledge in the hands of a small group of experienced people. She accepted the criticism and provided the documentation she had begun creating to distribute those decisions more clearly. Her willingness to expose her own limitation strengthened her credibility. The billionaire father then approached her privately and suggested that he could restore her name to the project history and arrange a role after opening if she allowed the matter to settle. She refused. A private appointment would confuse family influence with professional recognition and would turn her father into the source of the victory. She told him the process had to continue without his intervention. His silence during the public removal had helped create the governance problem. Private influence could not repair it. The father appeared surprised that she would reject the very restoration he believed she wanted. She explained that her name being returned by him would answer the wrong question. It might correct a family insult, but it would not establish whether her decisions had protected the hotel. It would also allow the same informal authority that enabled her removal to decide her return. By the end of the first phase, the evidence existed outside the family office's control. The father's wife still controlled the public image, but she could no longer erase the record or redefine the repeated results as a private disagreement. The heroine remained outside the official leadership structure, and the examination offered no guarantee that she would return. Opening night moved closer with 3 truths already established. A removed safeguard had produced a repeatable weakness. The heroine's original system contained a real dependency problem, and the final answer would have to come from performance rather than family authority. The independent examination changed the atmosphere around the hotel, but it did not immediately change the public balance of power. The father's wife continued attending planning meetings, speaking with partners, and presenting the revised structure as a disciplined response to the complexity of the project. She argued that the hotel needed one clear voice before opening night. Too many questions, she said, would weaken confidence among investors, vendors, and staff. The heroine understood why that argument sounded reasonable. A hotel could not operate through endless debate. But one clear voice became dangerous when that voice could remove professional objections without testing the consequences. While the records were being examined, the heroine worked under increasing pressure. She had no formal authority, no public title, and limited access to the preparation process. She could not issue instructions. She could not reverse the revised plan. She could only support the evaluators and help staff members understand the pressure points already visible in the evidence. Rather than acting as the hidden leader of the hotel, she began helping department managers document their own decisions. She asked them to identify where information entered their teams, who confirmed it, and what happened if that person was unavailable. She encouraged employees to record delays rather than cover them with extra effort. The work required restraint. Every time she saw a problem, her instinct was to fix it herself. Instead, she asked whether the system could solve it without depending on her. That became the work under pressure test for her growth. The evaluators identified 3 areas where the revised structure was most vulnerable: arrival coordination, room readiness communication, and cross-department service recovery. The heroine helped translate those concerns into repeatable tests rather than personal criticism. She also provided records showing where her original approach had relied on senior staff who understood her expectations without formal written authority. The hotel could not solve one concentration of power by restoring another. The heroine accepted that condition. The father's wife did not. She began limiting the information shared through the family office communication channel. She argued that incomplete findings should not reach outside partners and pressed for the process to end before the final opening rehearsals. Her escalation was no longer only about removing the heroine's name. It was about controlling which facts could influence the project. The heroine responded by keeping the examination focused on records that already existed and tests that could be repeated. She did not add allegations. She did not speculate about motives. She worked inside the evidence chain. Under pressure, her professional value became visible through the way she separated urgent problems from emotional noise. She knew that a delayed room was not the same as a failed opening, and one failed handoff did not prove every revised decision was wrong. She helped rank the risks by effect, timing, and ability to recover. That discipline prevented the process from becoming a broad attack on the project. It also made the father's wife's effort to dismiss the concerns less credible. The billionaire father remained caught between the public image his wife had built and the professional record his daughter had preserved. He continued avoiding a direct position, hoping the matter would end without forcing him to surrender control. His failure was becoming clearer. He had treated ambiguity as peace. In practice, the ambiguity allowed his wife to act through informal authority while no one accepted responsibility for the results. As the opening date approached, the evaluators requested a controlled comparison between the current operating model and a revised version built from the strongest parts of the heroine's framework. The new version would not restore her centralized authority. It would distribute decisions across qualified staff, require clearer handoffs, and create visible accountability. The heroine agreed to the test, even though a poor result could damage her credibility further. The father's wife objected, saying that another comparison would confuse the staff and create the appearance of instability. The test was approved because the hotel needed evidence, not appearance. For the first time, the heroine's quiet countermove had created a path stronger than public representation. She still had no title. The wife still stood at the center of the opening materials. But the next phase would be decided by how the systems performed, not by who controlled the presentation. The final preparation comparison took place several days before opening night. The test recreated the pressure of a full guest arrival period using the existing staff, schedules, and communication channels. In the first round, teams followed the revised procedures approved under the father's wife's preferred structure. At first, the property appeared ready. The entrance remained orderly, front desk positions were staffed, and rooms were marked available. As the simulated arrival volume increased, however, the underlying weakness became measurable. Room status updates reached the front desk late because housekeeping and guest services followed different sequences. Support requests moved between teams without one clear confirmation point. Employees solved individual problems, but each handoff required more time and more manual correction. The evaluators recorded the average transition time, the number of failed handoffs, and the amount of intervention required. In the second round, staff used a redesigned framework based on the strongest parts of the heroine's earlier model. It did not restore her centralized control. Department leaders received defined authority, communication points were standardized, and each handoff required confirmation before responsibility moved to the next team. Transition times improved. Failed handoffs decreased. Staff members solved problems without waiting for the heroine or any single manager to approve every decision. The result confirmed two truths at once. The wife had been wrong to remove the safeguards as though they were only extensions of the heroine's personality. The heroine had also been wrong to rely on unwritten knowledge held by a small circle of experienced people. The hotel needed the principles she had created, but it needed them in a form that could survive her absence. That measurable result changed the central question. The issue was no longer whether her name belonged on the original document. It was whether the institution would recognize the value of her judgment without rebuilding the same dependence that had made the project vulnerable. The father's wife argued that the hotel could not afford to present competing systems so close to opening. The evaluators answered that the public did not need to see the comparison. The staff needed to use the version that performed better. The heroine asked that the stronger distributed framework receive the final readiness test, and that the results remain attached to the decision record. She did not ask to be reinstated. Her father again suggested that the family could announce her return as a gesture of unity. She declined. Identity, reputation, and professional authority could not be repaired through one family announcement. The examination documented her contribution, the weaknesses introduced after her removal, and the limitation in her earlier design. She had gained proof, not a guaranteed role. The midpoint gave her something more demanding than vindication. It required her to accept that the strongest version of her work was not the version she had originally created. It was the corrected version that other qualified people could use without waiting for her. That truth changed her relationship to the outcome. She no longer needed the hotel to prove that she alone had been right. She needed it to prove that the principles she had protected could survive independent testing and shared responsibility. Opening night would determine whether the corrected framework could hold under real pressure, with real guests and no opportunity to restart the evening. Opening night arrived with the public story still controlled by the father's wife. The hotel's official materials displayed the revised leadership structure. Her preferred representatives stood near the entrance, greeted partners, and appeared in the opening photographs. The heroine's name remained absent. The examination had confirmed that parts of her work mattered, but no public correction had been issued. She entered the evening without a title, without consulting access, and without any guarantee of a future role. The cost was not symbolic. Her payment authority had ended when her access was removed. Several training sessions connected to her earlier position had been canceled or reassigned. The official record now included a finding that her previous model had concentrated too much decision-making in a limited number of people. Even if the opening succeeded, she would not qualify for immediate sole authority. For a moment, the father's wife appeared to have won. The hotel opened on schedule, the ballroom filled, and the public saw a unified image. The heroine stood outside the center of the celebration, watching staff members carry the responsibility she once would have taken upon herself. That was the apparent defeat. She had proven that her warnings mattered, yet the institution had not restored her. The project moved forward without giving her public credit. Her family connection could not change that outcome, and she had already refused her father's private offer to intervene. The strategy she had used at the beginning, preserve evidence and prove the removed safeguards mattered, had reached its limit. She needed a different approach. Instead of waiting for recognition, she chose to support the shared system without becoming its hidden controller. She made herself available only through the channels approved during the examination. When a department leader requested clarification, she answered the specific question and allowed that leader to make the decision. When staff members encountered pressure, she resisted the urge to step into command. She watched whether the distributed model could function without depending on her presence. The evening immediately tested that decision. Guest arrivals increased faster than the early schedule predicted. A room status delay created pressure at the front desk. A service request crossed departmental boundaries at the same time that a large group entered the lobby. Under the old centralized model, staff might have waited for one senior person to connect the problems. Under the corrected framework, department leaders shared the information, confirmed responsibility, and solved the issues before they became visible to most guests. The heroine's contribution remained present in the design, but the success belonged to the teams using it. That outcome was emotionally difficult. It proved her work mattered while also proving the hotel did not need her to stand at the center of every decision. She had wanted to build something durable. Durability required her to let other people carry it. The father's wife watched from the public side of the event. She could point to the smooth opening as evidence that her leadership structure had succeeded, but the evaluators were observing the same performance through a different lens. They knew which safeguards had been restored, which communication rules had reduced delays, and why staff could respond without waiting for one authority figure. The heroine did not celebrate. Her future remained uncertain. The hotel had succeeded, but she could still leave without a role. Her father could still remain silent. The wife could still claim the public image. The strategy change protected the positive goal at the cost of making the heroine less visibly necessary. By the end of the first hours, the hotel was operating more steadily than the revised plan alone had predicted. The apparent defeat remained real. She had no title, no public credit, and no immediate authority. But the institution now had live evidence showing that the opening succeeded because the strongest parts of her work had been preserved, corrected, and distributed. As opening night continued, the evaluators compared live performance with the preparation records and the earlier simulations. They examined which communication rules reduced delays, which handoffs prevented service failures, and whether staff could repeat those results without the heroine taking command. The pattern was clear. The corrected framework worked because it restored the strongest principles she had created while removing the dependence on one central decision-maker. Her contribution had survived testing, revision, and live pressure. The evidence did not show that she was the only person capable of protecting the hotel. It showed that removing her work without proper examination had weakened the project and that her warnings had identified risks the replacement structure failed to see. The father's wife received a final opportunity to respond. She could have acknowledged that public image control had overridden professional safeguards. She could have accepted the corrected structure and participated in a more accountable process. Instead, she made her final wrong choice. She argued that the smooth opening proved the revised leadership structure had been right from the beginning. She described the restored safeguards as minor technical adjustments and insisted that further examination would damage the hotel's reputation. She chose the appearance of control over an honest explanation of how the success had been achieved. The heroine did not answer with anger or expose private conversations. She allowed the statement to stand beside the documented results. Her reversal had come from a deliberate sequence. She preserved the versions, documented the missing protections, triggered examination, accepted scrutiny of her own work, supported the measurable comparison, and allowed the corrected system to operate without making herself indispensable. Opening night proved she had been right about the risk, but it also proved that simply restoring her former control would not have been the best solution. The billionaire father faced the findings without being allowed to solve them privately. He could not appoint his daughter, announce her return, or use family money to erase the process. His earlier silence and ambiguous delegation had enabled the conflict. The evaluators now had to determine whether he could retain informal approval over appointments and representation. The heroine answered questions about the work, acknowledged where her earlier approach had failed, and declined to present herself as the only possible leader. No applause interrupted the process. Guests continued enjoying the hotel, while the people responsible for governance prepared separate decisions about identity, professional contribution, and misuse of authority. By the end of the night, the wife still held the public title she had used throughout the event, but her refusal to accept the evidence had weakened her position. The heroine still had no formal role, but the truth no longer depended on anyone in the family choosing to defend her. The title promise had been fulfilled without turning the night into a public revenge scene. Opening night had proved the heroine right through the performance of the system, not through the failure of the hotel or the humiliation of the people who had removed her. The final review produced two separate recognition acts. The first concerned identity. The project history and family records already connected to the case confirmed that the heroine was not an outsider, temporary helper, or accidental participant. She had a legitimate family connection and had contributed to the hotel long before the revised materials erased her. The official history was corrected. That decision restored truth to the record, but it did not grant professional authority. The institution stated clearly that family connection did not prove competence, ownership, appointment rights, or entitlement to leadership. The second decision concerned her earned role. That determination relied on the planning framework, readiness results, documented risks, controlled comparison, and opening night performance. It also included the formal finding that her earlier design had concentrated too much knowledge and responsibility in a small group. The institution concluded that her judgment had protected the hotel and that her work merited professional recognition. Any future position, however, would require shared decision-making, documented handoffs, continued performance review, and safeguard against dependence on one person. Her standing came from work that survived scrutiny and real-world testing, not from her father's approval. The billionaire father then faced specific consequences for the governance failure he had enabled. He had allowed his wife to influence representation and project communication through an ambiguous family office role. He had remained silent during the public erasure and later attempted to repair the harm through private influence. He lost direct approval over operational appointments and could no longer determine project representation through informal family authority. His financial connection to the hotel remained, but it no longer carried appointment or representation power. The father's wife lost the authority she had used to revise public materials and control project communications. Her access to future operational decisions was restricted, and the misuse of her assigned role remained in the formal record. The consequence matched the power she had abused. The heroine also accepted limits connected to her own error. She was not restored as an unchecked central authority. Any role offered to her would operate under shared control, documented procedures, performance review, and removal safeguards. She accepted those conditions because they reflected the lesson she had learned. Leadership was not proof that everyone needed her. It was the ability to create a structure that remained strong when she stepped away. Identity recognition corrected the false classification. Earned role recognition confirmed the value of her work. Her father lost power because he had allowed personal loyalty to replace governance. His wife lost authority because she had protected image after the record showed the harm. No one rescued the heroine. The process she triggered and the evidence she preserved created the outcome. She did not leave the final meeting with the exact position she once held. She left with professional standing that no longer depended on family permission. The distinction mattered because it protected the ending from becoming another exercise of inherited power. Her name was restored to the truthful history because removing it had been false. Her role was recognized because the work had been tested. The two decisions met in the same story, but neither was allowed to substitute for the other. After the decisions were entered into the project record, the hotel continued operating under the revised shared structure. The consequences did not transform the family overnight. They changed authority first, which was the only repair the institution could enforce honestly. The billionaire father no longer approved operational appointments through private conversations. His financial connection remained, but it no longer allowed him to choose representatives, restore titles, or overrule the professional process. The father's wife no longer controlled the project's public materials or communication channels. Her removal from representative authority was not staged as a public humiliation. It was documented as the result of using an assigned role beyond its proper purpose and refusing correction after the evidence became clear. The heroine entered the aftermath with recognition, but not complete restoration. Her role, if she accepted it, would include shared authority and continued review. She could not return to a structure built around her personal judgment. That limitation was part of the justice, not a contradiction of it. She had asked the institution to examine the truth, and the truth included her own error. Emotionally, the outcome was quieter than the opening night conflict. There was no universal applause, no ballroom announcement declaring one person a winner, and no family embrace that erased the damage. The heroine walked through the hotel after the first full cycle of operations had been completed. Guests moved through the lobby without knowing how close the preparation process had come to protecting image instead of function. Employees used clearer handoffs, shared decisions, and recovery procedures that no longer depended on one hidden authority figure. The systems worked because knowledge had been distributed. The building represented the positive goal she had protected from the beginning: stable service, accountable staff coordination, and a guest experience stronger than the family conflict surrounding it. Her father requested a private conversation. She agreed only under boundaries she had already considered. She would accept direct communication, but not gifts, job offers, public reconciliation, or project proposals used as substitutes for accountability. He could write to her at agreed intervals, and she would decide whether to respond. He could not use staff members or professional contacts as intermediaries. He could not restore trust by attaching her name to another family initiative. The loss of his appointment and representation power remained in place regardless of their personal relationship. The father's wife received no immediate reconciliation. The heroine did not seek revenge, but she also did not pretend that procedural consequences automatically rebuilt trust. Future contact would depend on consistent respect for the new boundaries. The hotel itself became the final image of Earn Place. The heroine stood near the entrance after the evening traffic had settled. Her name could have remained absent from the first revised plan, and the truth would still have existed in the work, the records, and the people using the system. She had not won because her father declared her important. She had not discovered ownership hidden in a will. She had not inherited authority through blood. She had created the reversal by preserving evidence, accepting examination, correcting her own limitation, and allowing real results to speak where public image had tried to silence her. The lights remained on above the entrance as employees completed their handoffs, and guests moved through the hotel without seeing the conflict behind its foundation. The heroine did not need to stand at the center of the lobby for the ending to prove her place. The strongest evidence was that the hotel could now function honestly, with her contribution recognized and no single family member able to control the truth. A name could be removed from a plan, but meaningful work remained visible when independent results revealed who had built the foundation. This story is a fictional narrative created for entertainment, reflection, and educational purposes. Any resemblance to real people, places, or events is purely coincidental.